Okay, let's have a look at this 19th century prose extract together. This time, this is from a novel by H.G. Wells called The Time Machine. And again, as before, we're going to spend 15 minutes looking at the extract and annotating it together. And remember, the question for 19th century unseen prose is always the same: show how the writer of the extract engages the reader. And we're thinking about the characters' feelings and reactions throughout the extract, and of course, the writer's use of language, structure, and form, always using PEE to identify relevant methods, include supporting evidence, and then to explain the author's intended effect. So, as before, you will always be given this little explanation of what the extract is about. Let's read it together. There's this classic tale by H.G. Wells, is set in the last years of the 19th century. It tells the story of a scientist who invents a machine for time travel. He travels far into the future and meets the Eloi, a beautiful race of people who live only for pleasure, and the Morlocks, a race of underground creatures. In this first extract, the scientist describes his first experience of time travel. So, unlike Dracula, the genre of this story is certainly not horror. It's not gothic horror. The genre, you could say, is fantasy, because we're talking about a kind of made-up people, the Eloi and the Morlocks, and of course time travel. That's not realistic writing, it's fantastical fiction. And we're also looking at science fiction, at sci-fi. And interestingly, H.G. Wells is kind of known as the father of science fiction. He also wrote The War of the Worlds. He wrote a lot of stories about aliens and space. And that's just a wee bit of context for you. So quite different from the Dracula extract that we looked at before. Okay, let's start reading. And again, with 19th century unseen prose, we don't use highlighters. I'm not going to use any more highlighters as I begin reading. It wastes time going back and forth between a highlighter and a pen. Just use your pen. Underline or circle keywords that stand out to you, and then write in brief around the extract what the significance of those quotations are. So the extract opens. I am afraid I cannot convey the peculiar sensations of time travelling. And there it's immediately clear this extract is in first person narrative. And I suppose that creates this sense of immediacy. We are forced to empathise with the narrator in their experiences of a very strange and unfamiliar experience. And the impact of that experience is conveyed through a lot of negative adjectives. The word peculiar, which means strange. The word unpleasant later on. And then we have this word later, there's a feeling exactly like that one has upon a switchback of a helpless headlong motion. I felt the same horrible anticipation. So we have in very close succession. And it's not a tripartite list because they're not together. These are just negative adjectives, which are all associated with the narrator's emotions as he begins the experience of time travel. So unpleasant adjectives do that. As we read on, we see, I felt the same horrible anticipation too of an imminent smash. That word smash is onomatopoeia. And it conveys this sense that he is headed for destruction, headed for disaster, the sense of impending doom. And that is further exaggerated by the next line: as I put on pace, night followed day, like the flapping of a black wing. That is, of course, a simile. And remember, you should never write out the language features in full. It's a waste of time. Simile, that's grand. So night followed day like the flapping of a black wing. That word black, of course, forebodes danger. The sense that he's heading for something impenetrable, something where he can't see clearly. And it also enforces his increasing speed, creates a sense of a frantic hurry and the disorientation that the speaker is experiencing. That's further reinforced by the personification. I saw the sun hopping swiftly. So there we have personification, as he talks about the weather and the scene around him changing very quickly. Just creates a sense of a frantic pace, and the kind of sensory overload that the narrator is experiencing. Okay, as we move on, so the sun is leaping every minute, and every minute marks a day. So this is all about pace. The opening of the extract is all about how fast the narrator is travelling in the time machine. He goes on, I suppose the laboratory had been destroyed and I had come into the open air. I had a dim impression of scaffolding, but I was already going too fast to be conscious of any moving things. The slowest snail that ever crawled dashed by too fast for me. And there's the repetition of that phrase, too fast, which again enforces his increasing pace and speed. And then we have the hyperbole in that line, the slowest snail that ever crawled dashed by too fast for me. The hyperbole once again reinforcing the speed, this groundbreaking speed with which he travels. The speaker then goes on to create very powerful visual imagery, and it's visual imagery associated with space. He says, the twinkling succession of darkness and light was excessively painful to the eye. Then, in the intermittent darkness, I saw the moon spinning swiftly 3/4 from new to full and had a faint glimpse of the circling stars. So here we have imagery of space, visual imagery, where he describes what he sees and describes it as, once again, transitory or passing, fleeting. So we have words such as spinning swiftly, faint glimpse of the stars and the moon. So this connotes that everything is transitory, that it is quickly vanishing. And then as we read on, that sense that things are passing by quickly becomes even more exaggerated. He says, as we read, so presently as I went on, still gaining velocity, the palpitation of night and day merged into one continuous greyness. The sky took on a wonderful deepness of blue, a splendid luminous colour like that of early twilight. The jerking sun became a streak of fire. The moon, a fainter fluctuating band, and I could see nothing of the stars. So the first two are metaphors, the sun as a streak of fire and the moon as a fluctuating band. And those metaphors enforce that these reliable constants, the sun, the moon and the stars, they are always there. Reliable constants have become fleeting. They quickly vanish, fleeting and transitory due to time travel. Time travel has done these things to the constants in our universe. It's made them unreliable. That sense is further enforced as we read on. He says, the landscape was misty and vague. I was still on the hillside upon which this house now stands, and the shoulder rose above me grey and dim. I saw trees growing and changing like puffs of vapour, now brown, now green. They grew, spread, shrivelled and passed away. I saw huge buildings rise up faint and fair, and pass like dreams. So again, these are dependable, constant structures, trees and huge buildings. So these solid structures, whether man-made or natural, so buildings or trees, solid structures are now, they pass quickly, they're inconstant. Like dreams, like vapour, they quickly vanish. So these solid structures are momentary, they don't last, and great word for this is ephemeral. If you want to try to remember that word, ephemeral just means it doesn't last, it vanishes quickly, and that's what time travel has done to the world around the speaker. As we keep reading, the whole surface of the earth seemed changed, melting and flowing under my eyes. The little hands upon the dials that registered my speed raced round faster and faster. So you can see you don't have to comment on every single sentence. That's quite important. There are no significant language features there, and the meaning hasn't changed. The speaker is still simply focused on speed, pace, how quickly he's travelling, and therefore there's nothing new to comment on. And so the focus is sustained on the sun belt swayed up and down from solstice to solstice in a minute or less, and that consequently my pace was over a year a minute, and minute by minute the white snow flashed around the world and vanished and was followed by the bright brief green of spring. There we have contrasting colour imagery to connote the changing seasons and how quickly that's occurring. We move then into the last paragraph of the extract. It begins, the unpleasant sensations of the start were less poignant now. That means less kind of sad and overwhelming. He says they merged at last into a kind of hysterical exhilaration, and the language is becoming slightly more positive. I remarked indeed a clumsy swaying of the machine for which I was unable to account, but my mind was too confused to attend it. So hysterical, clumsy and confused. Again, those still negative adjectives, but they're more focused on how this scientific endeavour is quite uncertain, quite precarious. It's strange, it's new, it's uncomfortable, and those adjectives really make that clear. And so he's forced to fling himself into futurity, to kind of hand himself over to what's happening. At first I scarce thought of stopping, scarce thought of anything but these new sensations. Scarce thought of stopping, scarce thought of anything. That is, of course, repetition. And that repetition underlines how kind of overwhelming the experience is. He can't think of anything else except the new experiences that he is seeing around him. Then we have a tonal shift, and look out for connectives like but, which often will introduce a tonal shift. So the tonal shift, really see if you can see what it changes to. The narrator says, presently a fresh series of impressions grew up in my mind, a certain curiosity and therewith a certain dread, until at last they took complete possession of me. What strange developments of humanity, what wonderful advances upon our rudimentary civilization. So we have developments and advances. Those are positive, abstract nouns. They're not things that you can touch and feel. They're ideas, developments, advances. Those concepts are intangible, and that's what makes them abstract, because you can't actually touch them. Your senses can't engage with them. So he thinks about the developments and advances that may have occurred in the future, which he's about to experience. And he says, I thought might not appear when I came to look nearly into that dim elusive world that raced and fluctuated before my eyes. I saw great and splendid architecture rising above me, more massive than any buildings of our own time, and yet, as it seemed, built of glimmer and mist. I saw a richer green flow up the hillside and remain there without any wintry intermission. So these are, for the first time, flattering adjectives: great, splendid, richer. Flattering adjectives to describe the future as our narrator sees the benefits of scientific explorations. You can see how that tonal shift works. He goes from the negative experiences of beginning scientific exploration and then begins to focus on the positive consequences of scientific exploration. So the negative initial experiences, the positive final consequences. That's the tonal shift and how that works. And that prompts him to stop his journey. He says, even through the veil of my confusion, the earth seemed very fair, and so my mind came round to the business of stopping. Upon considering the benefits of his scientific experiment, he considers stopping his ship. And so the whole extract has been a description of this experience with the tonal shift towards the end. And that's this extract. Quite a tricky one, I'm sure you'll agree, because a lot of it's quite repetitive. But I hope that makes sense. And thank you so much for listening.